Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on top of page 1298. Aleph Ches Tzadik Reish. It's written that way because the regular order is a negative word, just for the record. Okay. But these pages are anyway made by the printer, not by the Rebbe Rashab. So I want to go over what we learned yesterday because it was a little dense Kabbalistic piece where the Rebbe Rashab, and as I said, in the third volume, you see more of this than earlier volumes, where a little shorthand and needs some words of explanation to connect it to before and after. So as I understand it, this last piece that we learned is about like summing up and bringing another source in Kabbalah and rounding out the topic of Havaya Chatum Rivov, which, as we learned, means that on one hand, there's an opposition to Havaya, the Latata, as he explained. In Zohar, we're Gvura, even the holy Gvura, Gvura's Kadeshus, B'nai Elokim, rise up on Rosh Hashanah, for example, that's what he was referring to, and challenge Havaya, the Havaya of Chesed, and say, no, the people do not deserve kindness. They deserve judgment. And the second part, that's one part. And then Yechatum Meriv, that we actually eliminate and shatter and nullify these opponents, these Gvuras, by reaching higher and deeper to what he called Havaya de La'ela, or in the language of the other parts of the language, going to Keser, to Atik, less Smoila Bahayatika, where there's no Gvura beyond even the kavim, the tracks of Chesed and Gvura, and of this, even this debate or this ability to have an opponent. In other words, you're not fighting the war on the terms of the opponent and say, okay, let's see who's stronger. You're actually accessing deeper resources and higher resources in order to nullify this. And even deeper is another aliyah all the way up to before the tzimtzum, to access the highest possible forces to eliminate these opponents. We'll soon learn that it's not just eliminating, it's also transforming. But we're not there yet. And this is the two aliyahs in the Gershayim. That the Gershayim, which is the tam, on top of the word Havaya, Yechatim, on the top of the Havaya, the two aliyahs, which in turn also bring two Yeridus. Because not only do you want to go up to these two levels, you want to draw them down. The further aliyahs, you want to draw them down into return it back to Zohar, that Zohar should now be empowered. There where the original kitur came from, the original complaint or the original prosecution came from, that too should be impermeated with these higher levels, that Zohar shouldn't just be without the moichin and the keser and all the higher, but Zohar is now elevated, like we learned, mutfa, murgish, muskel, that the midas themselves, which initially were your subjective behavioral or reflexive natural wiring, should be elevated to these highest levels and then be transformed by them. That's why he called it the midas become midas sichlim. They assume, and they together with the mind can now experience a higher reality. So it's not just you've escaped from the world of Zohar. We want to bring it back into Ishtalshlus and all the way into Biyah, even on the lowest level with the Gvuras, even in this world. That's the ultimate goal, to bring it all the way down. And in a way that's consistent, that it's not just two stages. That will be in Zman HaGolus, it's still concealed. So it's two stages. It'll be a seamless flow from the highest to the lowest. And that's the ultimate goal. And that's Havaya Chatam Rivav in the fullest sense of the word, which will be completed and the fullest way in the future. But today we have a taste of it. We have Me'ein Zelek, he says, a similar on Rosh Hashanah. So even though it may be concealed, like we learned at the end of the last paragraph on page 1297, nevertheless, even if it's concealed, it's still Abshachah from that place that has the ability to nullify and eliminate the dinim v'akitregim. And then he added the next paragraph, at the bottom of page 1297, what we learned about Divrei Torah, that Torah and mitzvahs, that Torah is not makabel tuma, even below, it repels and does not contract the impurities. But now I want to go back to the end of the paragraph, the bottom of page 1297. I'm going to go over it again now to the end of the paragraph. So I actually looked it up in the source, And I'm going to read from Koil Barama that he cites 3 lines from the bottom of 1297, which is a sefer, like he says, from Talmidei HaArizal, the students of the Arizal, in explaining the Idra Rabba, which I also looked up, and I'll give you now all the translations and exactly what it means. So when you look inside, it becomes a lot clearer. The Rebbe Rashab is citing just a very short segment of it, not the whole thing. So you'll see in a moment what he says. But first he said, "Lefize yeshlemer that avay yechatim koyegam Hashem avay deleila." I thought about this line a few times because I was wondering, as I said yesterday, why is he adding that? He said that already earlier, that the merivov, the enemy, the opponents come from avay delatata in Zohar. That's why there can be avay ish milchama. That's where God is engaging in battle, that, like he explained earlier. And then we access a higher level of avaya deleila that eliminates the opponents. So that's clear. So what is he adding here? So I'm thinking that number one, you could say he's not adding, he's just repeating, but then the lefize yeshlemer, what's the lefize yeshlemer? You already said it earlier. You don't need a lefize. The Rebbe Rashab made the statement. What did he say here that now, according to this, we can say? So I'm thinking that he means to say that the lefize yeshlemer is that also havaya de le'ela is not the perfect state. There too, there can be an opponent because it's still in the world of, like we say, mitzvahs, which is higher than avaya de l'tata. Avaya de le'ela is mitzvahs and Torah. Mitzvahs is the oisius, the letters of avaya, like the kalim. Torah is the oir of avaya. So it's true, Torah does not contract tuma, impurity, divrei Torah, not makabel tuma like we just learned, but mitzvahs are. So based on that, avaya de le'ela also has a merivov. There's also an element where there could be an achiza. And therefore, we need an aliyah even higher than avaya de le'ela to who, which is higher than shmoi, to the helam, like you learned earlier, which is higher than shmoi, and that eliminates altogether any type of challenge. So that's the yeshlemer is not just avaya de le'ela eliminates the challenge in avaya de l'tata, but avaya de le'ela also gets the strength from a level that's higher than shmoi, including avaya de le'ela from the level of who. And that makes also the connection to the next section clearer. This I did not point out yesterday because I didn't really review it properly, but now reading it, that's what I think is the yeshlemer here. So based on that, then he continues and says, and now we understand the connection. But Ayin Beis, you know, there's a comma after avay de le'ela chulu. So to me, that makes sense, unless, I'm assuming the manuscript, there's a comma in the actual writing. So now he's going to bring so-called a proof to this. From where? From the Pirush of Idra Rabba to the students of the Arizal, and in the parentheses he says Koil Barama, Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. I have the sefer right here, just in case you're interested. This is Koil Barama. This is what it looks like. And I'm going to read a section that the Rebbe Rashab is citing from in the fuller text of it, and then we'll understand it better. He also cites Shem and Sasson, which also I have here. It's another book. And I found it here, but I don't find the section where he says the kolshkein bein hakesed. If chav shin is kolshkein, it could be because of Sham, but I don't think so because I couldn't find those words. So I know the section. I found it in the Shem and Sasson, which is another commentary on the Zohar, on the Idra Rabba. But I couldn't find the exact the language. So I'm not sure what the words v'chav shin bein hakesed is referring to exactly. So just pointing that out. I'll do more research and come back about that. But I do know, okay, so now we have the Idra Rabba. Idra Rabba is one of the more cryptic parts of Zohar, as I discussed yesterday. It's referring to the large group, the large community, the large group of students of the Rashbi. So it's Zohar Pasha Nosei. There's a section called Idra Rabba, page 128b. So here's what he speaks about there. He talks about Atik Kadisha, which we discussed yesterday. Like the verse in Daniel, Atik Yemin Yosef al Kursaya. Atik Yemin sits on its Kursaya on the kisei, on a throne, on a chair. So he says, the Zohar says, and it doesn't quote the whole Zohar, it only quotes part of it. He sits on Kursaya de Shvivin, and you guys are right, shvivin are sparks, but he says there that it's like the sparks of fire. So what does it mean, a throne made of sparks of fire? He's sitting on the sparks of fire. He's sitting on the gvuras. That's what it means. That's the meaning of the Zohar, as explained by the commentaries. Atik is sitting on the gvuras, so to speak, sitting. He's sitting above them, al kasaya likafyalon, to eliminate them, to subdue them. So likafya, like from the word iskafya means to refrain, or skafya means to subdue, to control. So basically, he's imposing himself, Atik, to eliminate the gvuras. That's the meaning of the Zohar. But now comes the Koil Barama, the interpretation from the students of the Arizal, and this is how the Pirush Arizal. The Arizal explains, and I'm reading inside, and I'm going to read. So the Rebbe Rashab just says the Shavivin Heim Kuf Chof Tzirufim Elokim. Now remember, Gvura comes from Shem Elokim. Elokim is din, judgment. So in Elokim, there's 120 different combinations possible. The 5 letters of Elokim. You could write Aleph Lamed Kuf Yud Mem. You could write Lamed Aleph Kuf Yud Mem. You could write Aleph Lamed Yud Kuf Mem. So if you go through all the possible permutations of the combination of the letters, it adds up to 120, which refer to 120 dimensions in Gvura of Elokim. Just keep that in mind. The second thing to keep in mind, that this 120 breaks into 2 categories, 72 and 48. The 72 are considered the Gvuras K'deshes, holy judgments, meaning pure ones, and the 48, which is the letter Cham, Memches, like the letter Cham, is referring to the negative, the severities. So the 72, 48 add up to 120. So the 120 Gvuras of Elokim include both. So the Rebbe Rashab continues. And so I want to read from inside the Sefer Koil Barama right now, and then we'll go back to the Ayin Beis because it'll be clear. So I'm reading now from this page 12a in Koil Barama, which is as he refers to it on the bottom of page 1297. So here's what he says. Okay. I'm reading literally from the words, Mahari. This is coming from the Ari, the Koil Barama. The Koil Barama, if I recall correctly, which students published it? I think it was Tzemach and other students. Tzemach was Yaakov Tzemach was a very famous Mekubal who was a student of the students of the Arizal, and he put together a lot of the Kisra Arizal that we have today were gathered together, and I guess what's the word I want to say? Were collected together by him, and you'll sometimes see the name Tzemach in some of the Haggas. He makes footnotes where he corrects or explains or points out contradictions and so on. So it says like this, Mahari, which means it's coming from the Arizal. Yosef al Kusaya de Shvivin lekafilon. It's exactly the language from the Zohar that the Rebbe Rashab cites. So he sits, he doesn't say the word Atik came in here, but here Atik Kadisha does say it in Zohar. Sits on the throne of the sparks, lekafilon, to control or to subdue and to tame or even eliminate them. So he says, "Hu inyan soid nifla." The Arizal says this inyan is a soid nifla. It's a wondrous, it's an awesome secret. V'al tigalehu ela l'tznuim, and don't reveal it only to those that are discreet. Tznuim is a word for being like modest or discreet or quiet. Those that know how to keep a secret, basically. That's what he says. So it's a soid nifla, and do not reveal it only to the tznuim. Now, whether the word tznuim or not, I don't know, but clearly it's been revealed to us. So it goes like this: Da sheseid sviris hem pnimi ve'er makif. The secret, this expression in Zohar, in the Kisra Arizal, many times say that tzimtzum, the secret of the tzimtzum. It really means the doctrine of the tzimtzum, but it's called soid because it's the chelik hasoid of Torah, the esoteric secret, so to speak. So the word soid is used often, but you could say also the mystery but it also means the doctrine. So he says the Seid of Severities, it's known, consists of two dimensions, Ur Pnimi and Ur Makif. So every Sefira, Chachma, Bina, Dat, every Sefira has the Ur Pnimi, the energy, the divine energy, what we call Mabala Kalalman, that enters and permeates immanent energy, and Makif is like the Makif, the surrounding energy, or the transcendent energy, sometimes the Keser. So let's say Keser of Chachma, or Keser of Chesed for that matter, is the Makif that surrounds the sphere. So every sphere has the actual identity of the sphere, and in the language of Chassidus, the Makif would be the Rotzen. So when you have a desire to do Chesed, the desire is the Makif, the Chesed is the Pnimi, the actual implementation. I'm explaining a bit what this means. So we've learned this at length, especially in the first volume in Ayin Beis. So everything is Pnimi Makif. V'hine, and now, Mechutz Makif, outside of the Makif also has parameters. Even though its parameters are not a and a Keli, like Rotzen doesn't have a location. When you talk about an eye, the vision in the eye is a and a Keli, that's a Pnimi. The Makif doesn't have a Keli, but it still has parameters. So he says like this, Mechutz Makif, ben Makif l'chavere. And what's the proof? Very simple. The Makif of Chachma is not the Makif of Bina. The Makif of Chesed is not the Makif of Gvura. So that means the Makifim too basically orbit around their particular Pnimizdika specific sphere. Just like Keser of Atzilus is not the Keser of Bria. They have a relationship, but there's two different Kesers. Sorry. So he says, so outside of the Makif, between one Makif and another, and Chavere, and its so-called neighbor, Bein Cholol HaMakif, L'Sfiras HaKeser, between the Cholol HaMakif, the space, Cholol is like the space of the Makif, of Sfiras HaKeser, the Makif, the Sfiras HaChochma, Ubein Kol Sfiras Sfira. Let me just read it again, 1 second. Hine mechutz Makif, ben Makif l'chavere, ben Cholol HaMakif. Okay, so he says, "Ubein kol sfira v'sfira, ayin sham." I'm not sure what he means by ayin sham. Kol sfira v'sfira, es sfiras. Maybe he means to say es sfiras. I'm not sure what the word means. Anyway, bottom line is he's now speaking about what is between the makifim, what separates them. So he says, "V'zeh seid makif, aval mechutz yesh acher gam kein." Who say the Elokim. So all of this is referring to Makif, but Chutz, meaning outside of the Makif, there's a level called Elokim. 1 second. The Shem Hazeh, and this name of Elokim, Mispashet, it extends, B'derech Hispashtus, Oir HaSfiris. It extends in a form of an extension in the Eira Spheres through the energy of the spheres ad lamato b'seifa asiya, all the way below to the end of the world of asiya, b'siyo makuf chaf tzirufim, at the end of the 120 combinations of the letter name Elokim, elu dargin Elokim kadishin. These are the levels of the holy levels of Elokim. Sham mistaimim, that's where they end. Umisham ulamata nimshachim uboyim. Sham seid haklipas hanikra Elokim acherim. And then after that ends, from there is rooted what is called the secret of the klippas, the husks that are called Elokim acherim. When you say lo yelecha Elokim acherim, don't have other gods, other deities, that is, of course, talking about the clip of that's not kedusha. This will understand why they're called other gods, acherim, because it's like sitra acher, the other side. The reason they're called acharayim, meaning acherim, is because they're the outside of the sphere. So you have the makif, you have the pnimi, you have what then travels downward all the way down below, like he said. And then he says, and then becomes into the klippus of Elokim acherim, ulefi shemagia reish Elokim ze ad hakeser leze omer di Yosef hakeser al kusaya. And because we said that the Elokim all the way from the highest levels traveled all the way down, the reish Elokim shemagia reish Elokim ze ad hakeser. That's why he says that the keser sits on the throne of shvivin, of the sparks, uli kafilon, and in order to subdue or to eliminate them. V'hovin seda god lazeh, and you should understand this great secret or this great mystery. And then he adds one more thing, which may be relevant. I'll just read it. Omnom. Between keser la ein sof, chaz v'shalom svivas hakeser ein sham shum dover mezeh rak tachtov ben keser lechachma v'chen ki yetze ad haklipa. But to say from keser to ein sof, chaz v'shalom, to say that there's anything negative at all, it's only below Keser when it goes down to Chachma, and the same each sphere all the way down to the klippas that we just described. Now, the truth is, he continues to talk about it, and there's more details that would be helpful, but I think that's enough right now. So what do we see from this? So first of all, you see the Rebbe Rashab is just citing 2 lines from this, which makes it hard to understand. When you read this, you understand the bigger picture. So now let's go back to the Ayin Beis and we'll understand what he meant. Because yesterday we read it very short. So what did he say? He said, Kursai de Shvivin, the top of page 1298. That what are the Kursai de Shvivin? He says, they are, that kisei is the Kufchas Sirufim Elokim, the 120 combinations. Chutz la makif. Now we understand what means chutz la makif, because there's pnimi, there's makif, but then there is something that's beyond the makif, and that's the Elokim. Umispashtim b'derech hispashtus erasfiris. That's the exact language we just learned. They extend hispashtus erasfiris through the spheres ad sefer asiyah, till the end of asiyah, all the way down, which we understand now, down means all the way into the place of klippas, which is the 48 negative gvuras. Like he said here. And the head of this Elokim, the top of it, reaches all the way up to Keser, which is Atik that sits on the kursaya, on the seat, on the throne. And that ultimately, lekafilon, that's why, that's the point. So Atik Yemin is Keser. Atik and Kadisha. Sitting on the throne here is referring to Elokim, which is outside of the Makif of Keser, as it goes downward. And what is its accomplishment is that this Atik and Kadisha should sublimate or eliminate the din of all the Gvuras. And then he says, and elsewhere it's explained, I didn't find the Mokamacher yet. The Bnei Elokim heimnan mshachim b'chinas Ayin Beis sirufim hanal. Now we understand what he means by Ayin Beis, because Ayin Beis 72 out of the 48, the holy ones. Remember, Bnei Elokim is the ones that challenge Havaya, but they're coming from Gedusha. They're coming from a holy place. So they refer to the 72. The negative Gvuras Koshes, the harsh severities we learned about, are coming from the 48, which are the lower ones. And that's what he means. And now the Rebbe Rasha brings it back to our discussion. So now we know that we need to reach all the way to these highest levels. So even though till now he just said Atika Kadisha, but now he invokes the Helam, which is even higher than Havaya de La'ela, like he said before. And from there ultimately comes the power to eliminate. But the Oz, in the parentheses, Oz Shem Havaya Me'eb Chines Aprimis Ve'atzmis. By Dezem is Batlin. So essentially we reach all the way to the Helam. The Helam in turn empowers Atika Kadisha and Keser. And ultimately Havaya de La'ela. And that eliminates. And that's why he says afterwards, Olav b'shamayim, what did I say? Yeroim, that God in heaven, he thunders. So Olav, most likely, Apipshat means on the enemy. Like it says Merivov, so Olav would be the enemy, even when the enemy challenges heaven. So God thunders from there against the enemy. But he says, Omnam yesh lefarish, that Olav b'shviloi, b'shvil havaya. In other words, it goes on Shem Havaya Shebishviloi, in order to empower Havaya, Bishvil for Havaya, God Yuram Min Hashamayim, that he thunders from where? From something that's higher than Havaya, that empowers Havaya to eliminate the Gvuras of Elokim and Bnei Elokim, which refers to the 72 of the 120 Tzirufim of Elokim. As he concludes the paragraph. From there comes additional energy in Havaya to in turn to eliminate or shatter the opponents. Okay, so we went over this piece a little more in detail. I'll be happy to answer any questions if anybody wants to ask it.
It's very subtle. So it comes on a level of Kesser, but it's not Kesser, this whole business with Elokim, right?
Elokim is lower than Kesser. Elokim is din. Elokim is judgment and din.
But it seemed that he was saying interwoven at that level, but not Kesser, but interwoven at that level comes out. That's what it appeared to me.
Let's talk. The language in the Zohar is Atika Kadisha, which is like Kesser, sits on Kursaya Deshvivin. It sits on a chair of fiery sparks, which is Gvuras, Elokim, in order to subdue them. That's the Zohar. He explained what that meant in the comment. The Arizal explains what that refers to. That Elokim, which is Shvivin, Kusai de Shvivin, are the 120 combinations of Elokim, which is Din, which are outside of the Makif, outside of the Makif of Keser, and they go all the way down below. They consist, as I said, from 72 and 48 different Gvuras, all the way to the most negative, and from there comes Elokim Acherim, all the Klippas and so on. And so from Keser, from the Atika Kadisha sitting on the throne, it subdues the throne of Elokim, which is these Gvuras. Now, based on the explanation here in Ayin Beis, the ultimate place that's coming from is from the Helam, which is even a higher level. But the process is that Keser, or Atika Kadisha, is eliminating the opponents of Gvuras of Elokim.
Wow, very heavy.
Is the Kesser of this Atik Yomim, is it eliminating all the Gvuras or just the 48 Elokim Acherim?
We learned earlier that Bnei Elokim, which comes from Kedusha, also that on Rosh Hashanah, the prosecuting angels, even the holy ones, say, 1 second, the people don't deserve chesed. They deserve to be judged. So it's eliminating that too. Yeah.
And the 48 and 1 and 72, how do they arrive at those numbers? Is there an understanding that we understand how come there's 48 bad Gevuras and 72 that are B'nai Elokim that are of Kedusha, Elokim of Kedusha. How do we get those two numbers?
What I saw so far is that Mem Ches is Cham, from the word Cham, like Shem Cham and Yafas, so it refers to Cham, which is always Klippa. The Ayin Beis, I'm assuming, is maybe connected to, well, the Ayin Beis we usually hear about, the Shem Ab is usually Yutke Vovke. I didn't see yet inside anywhere. I mean, I have to look. It's discussed, there's some place in Chassidus this is cited. You can look at Erech Elokim and Sefer Elokutim, he talks about it, a few other places. I still have some things to look up. Like he said, a Kamosh Koser b'Mokamacher, Mavur b'Mokamacher on line 2. It's like, I don't know the exact, how the numbers work, why it's 72 exactly. But remember, like we learned earlier, all Gvura, even the most negative, originate from somewhere. Remember we said that Reisha de Esav is Ba'atfe de Yitzchak. We learned earlier, if you go back on page 1288. So he said, the Zohar says, the head of Esav, which is Gvura, negative Gvura, Ish Melchama, Yedetzayid, that he's is rooted Ba'atfe in the bosom of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is Gvura too, Pachad Yitzchak, but Yitzchak is Gvura of Kedusha, as we learned. If you don't mind, just everyone mute if you don't mind. Yitzchak, but Gevura, as soon as you have Tzimtzum and Gevura, even if it's for a good intention, concealment always is potential breeding ground for negatives. Like we learned earlier, as soon as there's a Helam, as soon as the so-called God is, we think God is not watching, that's where all the problems can begin. So even though originally it's Kedusha, but as it evolves, it can evolve into harsher and more negative. And that's why, even though Shem Elokim, you could say is a holy name. How could there be a Mem Ches and Shem Elokim that's negative? Because it's referring to, as Elokim goes downwards, the concealments get stronger and stronger till the point that it can start becoming a concealment that can lead to negative things. That's really the understanding of it. It's not that Elokim itself. That's why Elokim Achedim. The way it's in Kel Barama seems like Elokim Achedim is after Elokim, after the 120. But based on the Mem Ches, maybe it starts already within Elokim, as it's going downward, it starts already the so-called the negative energy start emerging. We learned this earlier, how the very harsh severities could not be there. It's like if a person criticizes someone, even if it's good intention, another person listens and starts criticizing with not such good intention. So positive gvura can end up becoming a very negative gvura. You have to be very careful how we speak, how we judge, how we criticize in that sense. I just want to see one thing here in that context now that we're talking. Elokim Acherim. Kuf Chaf, Elu Dargin, Elokim Kadishin. Heimestime, Mesham Lamata, Nechshavim, Boim Sham Sedek Tippus. Yeah, here it seems like the 120 all are Kadeshim. Rabbi Rashab doesn't really spell it out. He just mentions the 72. And it's interesting, Ayin Beis Sirufim Hanal, even though Al-Nal was Kuf Chaf, but I guess, relying that when you look it up in the source, you see. I'll do a little more research on this. Okay, but that's the general picture. Any other questions?
You said you were looking for, you didn't see the Lashon Beina Keser, but you saw that you read that today, right now,
yeah,
right?
I know. That's what but I don't see it. It could be, let me just see something. You're right. Good point. Because you see, he says, so I thought the next three lines are referring to Shamai Marashbi. You may be right. It could be Ubein HaKeser is referring back to Kel Barama, to the beginning of the parentheses. Good point. Very good point. Let me just see. Yes, I did read something like that. But he said, let me just see the exact language. Yeah, Bein HaKeser La Ein Sof. So maybe then V'Vav Chav Shin is, as Naftali said yesterday, V'Kosav Sham.
Or the Chol Shekain. That's that you have to read what it said inside. Maybe it's a line that's
But it
starting.
doesn't say v'kolshkein. It doesn't say inside v'kolshkein. That's why I'm saying, I'm looking right now. It says omnom beina keser la ein sof. It sounds to me, even if that's the case, the Rebbe Rashab is being very cryptic here. It's like he's just like in the parentheses, he's just like almost writing to himself which text he's referring to. Let me just see something here.
You have the Sefer B'Shem and Sosan by you?
I just showed it, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that may be correct. That may be because came back. That is saying because of Shambeina Kesa. Yeah, possible. I want to see if there's any Maimorim before the Rebbe Rashab that cites the Zohar and these commentaries. So maybe there would be some indication of what lines he's citing. I feel there is something because he does say on the second line on top of page 1298, Umavur b'mokamacha, the lefizeh. Meaning somewhere else this is explained, this Zohar, this Idra Rabba. So if I can find that, I think it will be helpful. I haven't found it yet. I'm looking more. We'll find it. It may be even in Biyuri HaZohar, maybe. Maybe the Mittler Rebbe's Biyuri HaZohar. Let me look right now. I have all these books here, yeah. I have a pretty good collection of Kabbalah firms, just in case if you're interested, if you're bored, you can come over. What page in the Idra Rabba is it? Kuf Chav Ches Beis, let's see.
Yud Beis Aleph.
No,
Not
that's
Yud
Koil
Beis.
Barama. The Zohar is Kuf Chav Ches Beis. That's the Koil Barama. That's not the Zohar. Peches Aleph. Let's see. I may have found something. I don't know. Not necessarily. Okay, this is long. I'm going to have to read it on my own. A long piece here. But it could be, may talk about it here. Sounds like it. Okay, I'll do my little homework, and I'll get back to you. Yeah. Okay. Fine.
One last question, if I may, quick one. Are we learning here that in order to Havaya Yechato Marivov, in order to conquer the Gevoras, the Shivishim, sitting on top of the Gevoras to conquer them, we're coming from the level of Hu, which is a Helam Atzmi, which is ultimate Gevoras. So is ultimate Gevoras the key to defeating the Gevoras Kashos?
First of all, he didn't use the word ultimate Gvuras. He used the word Helam and Helam Atzmi. You could say is the root of all roots. But it's an interesting point to touch upon. We're going to learn, as I said, this is far from over. There's at least 20 more pages, if not more. He's going to talk about this. Where there's a concept of Hamtokis HaGvuras B'Sharshan. You may recall it from Tanya, that you sweeten the Gvuras, you go back all the way to their source root. That's where you sweeten it from. It's like any transformation always has to come back from the thing itself, like Minei Bei Abba, the concept of homeopathy or antibiotics, where from the tree itself, makes the handle of the axe that cuts down the tree. So there is the concept of going back to the who, but I would reserve any discussion on that once with the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain it quite at length. There's soon going to come a section that actually we knew about because the Rebbe cites it in a letter. Remember, this all is Ayin Beis was not revealed to us until 1977, end of 76, actually. The Teskis of Tav Shlam and Zayin, actually 77 and on. That's when Ayin Beis was first printed. We only had a small section of Ayin Beis from the beginning. But the Rebbe in a letter from many years ago, from before the Nesius, has a letter where he cites a whole section Ayin Beis, 3 levels of Hamtokas HaGvuras, 3 ways to sweeten the Gvuras. So there's a lot more to be discussed, and there's going to be talk about that, how the Helam ultimately is the key to eliminating, and more than that, transforming the Gvura. Because you don't just want to eliminate. We're going to learn about transformation. You want to take that the harshest Gvuras, the Holocaust itself, will not just be eliminated, but the very heart of it will be transformed into something that goes all the way to the highest levels in Elokus, higher than all Giluyim. Because at the end of the day, the darkest moments in history is the ultimate concealment. And yes, it wouldn't have been possible if there was no concealment of the divine. If God did not have the power of Helam, we'd never have Helam in this world. So the worst darkness that we have ever experienced, including Holocausts, ultimately were only made possible because God could conceal himself, or else it wouldn't have been possible. So Chassidus is not satisfied by just saying, let's eliminate the enemy. It needs to be transformed because the only way it has to be redeemed. We cannot accept that thousands of years of Golus, we just eliminate and say, okay, from now on, it's going to be good. We have to ultimately redeem even the darkest of the darkest. And it's not going to be explaining how evil is transformed. Evil needs to be eradicated. But somewhere in the deepest heart and soul of it, it originated because had God not concealed himself, it would never have been possible. Which is why Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, why are you doing evil to the people? But God isn't doing it. Pari is bathing in the blood of Jewish children, Rahman al-Islam. What does God have to do with it? Because ultimately, if God did not conceal himself, Pari could never have done that. So, sure, you can't blame God, but it ultimately, like the Rebbe says in the Tu B'Shvat Lamates, famous Sikha, the Rebbe crying about the God concealed himself so well that this child stopped seeking him. What do you want from the child? You concealed yourself so well, we can't find you. So, in a way, that is the root. This is very much the central theme of Ayin Beis, of the transformation of the Tzimtzum. Not just the elimination of it, not just saying, okay, fine, but actually transformation. So you're touching upon that, and it's going to be discussed at length for sure. That's going to be the ultimate Ein Oid. More than Havayu Elokim, more than Gilui into the Helam, that the Helam itself will ultimately be able to go back and say that which God concealed himself, which led to everything else, is ultimately going to be transformed. We're going to see the godliness even in the Helam, so to speak. I think this is also why he's bringing so many details, because once you understand the Chassidus, even the Zohar and the Talmid Arizal comes alive in a different way. You know, when you read the Idra Rabba and you read the Kol Barama that I just read, yes, you see a Soy, there's some deep things, but you don't understand. Like, why does he say don't reveal it to anyone? What's he saying already? But when you learn up Chassidus, you start realizing you're saying that the deepest powers in the darkest moments. That's not something that it's easy to digest. That in the Holocaust itself, where children, innocent Jewish children, were being gassed, to say that you can find not a redeeming element, but ultimately connected to somewhere where it's where all the way in the highest levels, that can be a very sensitive matter. And when you really appreciate it, that's why he calls it a Seid Gadol, that I saying do not reveal it except to those that are Bali Snuyim, those that are discreet and will keep it secret. So it's only with Chassidus that you really understand Kabbalah. You read this on your own Kabbalah, you'd never come to appreciate it on this level. But the Rebbe Rashab is bringing it into this whole picture. So we're talking about very profound concepts here about, it's one thing talking about Giluyim of Elokus. That alone is quite overwhelming. Now we're talking about the darkest of the darkest even. I mean, when we started this whole section, I prefaced by saying that, but you see, Now, he's not only talking about the darkness of the dark, he's also talking about Gvuras Kadeshis, the holy Gvuras and judgments. So it's not just that. I'm just saying, but it includes that. I think as we learn, it'll become clearer and clearer. But good.
There is no way to understand. This is a question, the transformation, right now at least.
I think when we finish learning in Ayin Beis, we'll see how much we understand. If you're talking about without learning Chassidus, no, you're not going to understand it at all. With Chassidus, I don't think when you say understand, doesn't mean rationalize. We're not looking for an explanation why bad things happen. We're looking to understand how they can happen. Like, what are the dynamics that allow them to happen? And whether that can be transformed. Why? Listen, but we are trying as best as possible to connect with God, even in those mysteries, as much as possible. Obviously, as I've always said, there's always going to be a point where you're not God, and there's going to be that no person can see me and live. But that doesn't mean that Chassidus doesn't try to reach the highest and the highest. And then it comes down to where we can begin to experience the who. Remember, who is, he said, not just L'mayla Megilui, L'mayla Megeder Gilui. It's not even in the domain. It's not even in the area of anything that's revealed. And yet, he is talking a language here that too will be revealed. So as I explained, we need to understand, how do you reveal something that's not even in the world of revelation? It's like saying, can an apple become a neshama? They're not in the same realm. And yet, as we're going to learn, the Chassidus is working hard, and the Rebbe Rashab here to really bring it to life. I just found actually a mimer as I was looking through this, a mimer Shuvi Yisrael from the Mittler Rebbe, that I see a lot of the ideas about the transformation of the Tzimtzum are based on that. That's where I started finding the Kuf Chaf of Elokim, the Memches Ayin Beis, the mimer from the Mittler Rebbe in Shuvi Yisrael in Dvarim on Shabbos Shuvah mimer.
I think that we learned that in Ayin Beis or in Tzadik Dalet, the Mem Ches and the Ayin Beis Tzurufim. I don't remember.
The Mem Ches and the Ayin Beis, I don't remember, yeah?
I think so. I don't remember clear, but I hear that. I think it was one of these two things.
For some reason, I don't remember that. Maybe, possible.
And also the Navi is saying, Oid Hashem, which means that in our level, we will...
That's right.
Say it.
I think is the only way to explain it is the way Ayin Beis is going to explain it. Look, it's an expression that shvirosan zui takanosam. When it comes to evil, the only tikkun is breaking, destroying the evil. But at the same time, Chassidus explains, you free the spark in it. There's no such thing in existence. Even the darkest of the dark has to have a spark. In Tanya, when he says, Gimel Klippus Atmeis, Ein Behem Teiv Klal, in chapter 1, the end of chapter 1, and then later in chapter 6, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe emphasized, Ein Behem Teiv Klal Mitzad Atzmam. And the Rebbe Rashab gives the example of Chaticha Nasa Nevela. You could have a kosher piece of meat that falls into a pot of treif meat, even though the piece is kosher, but now it's been completely consumed, and therefore becomes treif. Not because it's treif on its own, but because it's now held hostage. But when you break the evil and you eliminate it, you then can free even the sparks of Shalosh Klippus Atmeis. So that's where the transformation happens. Not in the very evil, in the spark that allowed it to be. The spark that got, he says, Nechshach ad kedei kach, he says, it's darkened to the extent, a chaticha, a kosher piece of meat becomes nevela, unkosher. Like a black hole. That's so powerful, the gravitational pull, it doesn't allow even light to escape. So it looks like total black, total darkness. We're going to talk about this a lot more. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here. I mean, we just went over this top of the paragraph. Any other questions?